Bret Bielema is now in his 4th season as head coach of the Illinois Fighting Illini, and so far, he has done a tremendous job. The Illini have not only been competitive for pretty much the entire time he's been there, but they now have 2 seasons in which they have shown to be legit. Back in 2022, the Illini broke out with Chase Brown and a stout defense, and this year the Illini are currently 4-0, ranked inside the top 25, and have a huge opportunity to knock off a top 10 Penn State team this upcoming weekend. I'm not saying whether it will happen or not, but Illinois is a different team now. They're a team that is difficult to beat, they're well coached, and it seems like they have figured out a system to get wins consistently. In today's video, I want to talk about how Bret Bielema rebuilt Illinois football. At one point, Illinois was near the bottom of the Big Ten, and honestly, he was sort of a laughingstock. No one took them seriously, and they were never a threat to beat big-time opponents. Now they are. That's thanks to Bret Bielema. Today we're going to talk about his rebuild, how Illinois got to this point, and what the future could also look like for them. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about how Bret Bielema rebuilt Illinois football. So despite me being a diehard Mizzou football fan, I've always had a little bit of a soft spot for Illinois. I don't really care about the bragging rights, as I've always loved to see the Illini succeed in both football and basketball, and it stems from when I first started watching college football. I clearly remember those games in which Mizzou and Illinois faced off in St. Louis, and guys like Juice Williams and Nathan Shieldhouse were a ton of fun to watch, and I always loved Illinois' color scheme. Also, every single time I went through Champaign, I always thought it was a pretty neat little town, and thought it would be really cool if they had a successful football program. While they have had their moments, the past decade or so has been a little bit rough for the Illini. So going back to the 2000s, when I ultimately watched a little bit of Illinois football, that was when Ron Zook was the head coach. He made the Illini relevant in his 3rd season, as they ended up going 9-4 and lost in the Rose Bowl. That was the infamous year they beat Ohio State. They ended up being ranked as high as number 18, and over the next couple of seasons, Illinois ended up stagnating a little bit. They missed bowl games in both 2008 and 2009, before getting back to bowl eligibility in back-to-back years in 2010 and 2011. The team went 7-6 and won the Texas Bowl and the Kraft Fight Hunger Bowl. In that final season of the Zook era, Shieldhouse was the quarterback at the time, and Michael LaShore was the running back. He ended up having a crazy season in which he put up 1,700 yards and 17 touchdowns, and you also had A.J. Jenkins, who went on to become a 1st-round pick at receiver, but also one of the biggest busts in NFL history, as I'm not even sure he made the active roster for the 49ers. That's a video in itself. From there, the Illini would end up falling on hard times. In 2012, they would hire Tim Beckman to be their new head coach as he came over from Toledo. Toledo was kind of a pipeline for big-time coaches, as they had recently seen Gary Pinkel leave and have success at Mizzou. They tried to have their own successful Toledo coach, but unfortunately Tim Beckman could never really get it to work. In 2012, the team went 2-10 with an 0-8 mark in the Big Ten, and then in 2013 they went 4-8. They would end up making a little bit of progress in 2014 as the team would go 6-7, but ultimately lost in the heart of Dallas Bowl. The loss would come to Louisiana Tech, and that's not exactly the greatest loss on anyone's resume. During that time, Illinois still had quarterback Nathan Shieldhouse. They also had former Oklahoma State quarterback Wes Lunt, and then guys like Mike Dudek at receiver and Josh Ferguson at running back were also decent players. Also, Geronimo Allison was on the Illini, and he ended up having a decent career in the NFL as well. Before the 2015 season, Illinois would have a ton of chaos, as literally 1 week before the 2015 campaign, the Illini decided to fire head coach Tim Beckman as he was accused of influencing medical decisions and pressuring players to play hurt. Beckman said the allegations were utterly false, and he said he would take legal action, but ultimately they got rid of him, and Illinois' 2015 season was done before it even started. While in rare cases we have seen interim head coaches have a lot of success, like most recently Jake Dickert and Mike Braun at both Northwestern and Wazoo, the 2015 season would not go according to plan for the Illinois Fighting Illini. The team ended up going 5-7 with a 2-6 mark in the Big Ten, and honestly that was a little better than I probably expected them to be. That team was headlined by quarterback Wes Lunt, running back Keyshawn Vaughn, who's now in the NFL, and then obviously Geronimo Allison, who ended up becoming one of the better receivers in the Big Ten that season. Bill Cubitt would end up leading the team to 5 wins, and he wasn't just some dude off the street, as he did have multiple years of head coaching experience at Western Michigan. Ultimately, Illinois would decide to go in a new direction going into 2016, and they made an interesting hire. They went out and got Lovie Smith. This was a very interesting hire. Lovie Smith was more known for his NFL success, as he was the coach of the Bears from 2004 to 2012, and then the Buccaneers from 2014 to 2015. Sadly, he ended up getting fired in the NFL, but some thought he could maybe do better at the college level. Garrick McGee ended up being his OC, and there was some momentum that Illinois would be able to get to national prominence underneath Lovie Smith. Their AD said, quote, "Naming Lovie Smith as the Illinois head football coach is the first step in taking this program to a place of national prominence." Sadly, things would not go according to plan, as Illinois really struggled under Lovie Smith. They went 3-9 with a 2-7 mark in 2016, and then went 2-10 with an 0-9 mark in 2017. Honestly, there was just not a lot of talent on this team. They rotated between Jeff George and Chase Crouch at quarterback. They didn't have a running back break over 400 yards, and honestly, the receiving position wasn't great either. Things would not really get that much better, as they did go 4-8 in 2018 with a 2-7 mark, and then finally in 2019 they did have a little bit of a breakthrough performance. This came because they finally had a little bit of stability and talent at the quarterback position. After neither MJ Rivers or AJ Bush worked at quarterback, they went out and got former blue chip quarterback Brandon Peters from Michigan, from neighboring states Indianapolis, and he ended up coming in and started right away. He ended up throwing for 1,800 yards with 18 touchdowns. Reggie Corbin and Dre Brown became two of the better backs in the Big Ten, and Josh Imatorbhebhe ended up having 9 touchdown passes. The height of the Lovie Smith era would come in 2019, as they would upset Jonathan Taylor and an undefeated Wisconsin team in an absolute thrilling game. As I said though, sadly Illinois would not finish the season that strong, as they'd ultimately go 6-7 and lose in the Red Box Bowl. They'd end up losing that bowl game to Cal, and Lovie Smith was officially on the hot seat. In 2020, Peters was once again back, and we saw the slow emergence of Chase Brown at running back. This did not lead to much success though, as ultimately Lovie would go 2-6, and this was his final season in college, as through 5 years, he had an abysmal record. For a guy who was supposed to lead them to national prominence, he ended up going 17-39 with a 10-33 mark in the Big Ten, and only had 1 bowl game appearance. It was a really pathetic stint. While on paper, many thought he'd be a good recruiter and would be able to take what he learned in the NFL and apply it to college. It really backfired, and Illinois went into a deep and darker hole. From there, they'd really have to hire someone who could build a program, take his time, and have them consistently competitive. That's where they ended up getting Bret Bielema. After becoming a lineman at Iowa, Bret Bielema would quickly go up the coaching ladder, eventually taking over at Wisconsin and having so much success there that he bolted for Arkansas. Bielema recruited well and had a couple of bright spots while he was in Fayetteville, but ultimately he got run out of town, and now after a couple of years in the NFL with assistant roles, he would take over as the head coach at Illinois. Many were skeptical of the hire, but at the same time, I personally thought it was solid. He totally fit what Illinois needed and would have them competitive in the Big Ten in no time, but there would be some growing pains. So in Bielema's first season, he actually had a decent staff. Tony Peterson ended up being his offensive coordinator, and at DC, he grabbed Ryan Walters from Mizzou. Walters is now the head man at Purdue, and while he's not doing that great there, that was still a pretty big hire at the time and really helped to shape his defense. Ultimately, Illinois was still picked to finish at number 7 in the Big Ten West, but they'd end up having a better year than expected. In week 0, they would play against Nebraska, and I remember being at that game. Nebraska had an all-time choke job as per usual, and Illinois won 30-22 in Bielema's first game. Sadly though, losing would start to set in. They lost to a good UTSA team, got killed on the road against Virginia, and then lost a close heartbreaker to Maryland. They then lost a close one to Purdue before they got their second win of the season against Charlotte. Against his old school, he got killed by Wisconsin 24-0, and then he pulled off the biggest upset of his early tenure. On the road against number 7 Penn State, the Nittany Lions and Illini went to 9 overtimes. Illinois ended up winning, and that ended up being one of the biggest upsets of the 2021 season. From there though, they ended up following it up with a close loss to Rutgers before another ranked win. They went on the road and beat PJ Fleck's number 20 ranked Golden Gophers, and Illinois was within striking distance of a bowl game. Sadly though, they would go 1-2 as they'd end up losing to number 17 Iowa before then killing Northwestern to finish the year at 5-7. At the time, Brandon Peters was the main quarterback, and Art Sitkowski was his backup when he was hurt. At the running back spot, Chase Brown came in and ran for over 1,000 yards, and former quarterback turned receiver Isaiah Williams was number 1 in that department. On the defensive side of the ball, you already had guys like Sidney Brown and Kirby Joseph, and you were starting to see the rise of Devon Witherspoon and Jerzon Newton. Those guys all become very important later. Going into 2022, Illinois was seen as a sleeper in the Big Ten, but they were once again picked to finish near the bottom. This time they had a new quarterback, as they brought in former blue chip recruit from Syracuse Tommy DeVito, and also saw the emergence of some new weapons. The 2022 team won their first game against Wyoming before they'd go on the road to play against Indiana. In another game that I was personally at, it feels like I was at so many of these games, Indiana and Illinois went back and forth, and after blowing a ton of different opportunities, Indiana went down the field and scored, and Sean Shivers punched it in for the victory, and Illinois lost 23-20. While this was a major setback, it didn't prove to be that costly for Illinois. They'd end up beating Virginia 24-3, would then destroy Chattanooga, and then go on the road and get a monster win against Wisconsin. They killed the Badgers 34-10, and Bielema meant business. From there, they played in a classic Big Ten West game as they beat Iowa 9-6, and then for the second straight year, he'd get the best of Coach Fleck, winning 26-14, and then they'd kill Nebraska 26-9. Illinois had now won 6 straight games and would be ranked as high as number 16. They'd face off against Michigan State in early November, and they had a real chance at winning the Big Ten West. Sadly, though, they would end up blowing it. They lost by 8 points against Michigan State, and then ultimately lost to Purdue at home by 7, and gave the Boilermakers a path to Indianapolis for the championship game. Despite those 2 losses, they would fight extremely hard, and went on the road and almost beat number 3 Michigan. The Wolverines used a late field goal to win, and now they had dropped 3 in a row. Luckily, Bielema's Illini would end up beating Northwestern again, 41-3, and they'd finish the regular season at 8-4. They'd play number 22 Mississippi State in the Reliquist Bowl, and would ultimately lose that one. While the Illini did lose 4 of their last 5 matchups, it was a pretty special season in Champaign, and Bielema was showing that he was starting to figure it out. Chase Brown became one of the best backs in the country, running for 1,600 yards and 10 touchdowns. Tommy DeVito proved to be solid at quarterback, throwing for 2,600 yards and 15 touchdowns. Then the receiver room got a lot better. You had Isaiah Williams, Pat Bryant, Brian Hightower, and Casey Washington all catching passes, and Tip Raymond also started to see the field. In terms of the defense, they had some really good players. Isaac Darkangelo ended up leading the team with 72 total tackles. Jerzon Newton became a force on the defensive line with 5.5 sacks, and Devon Witherspoon became an All-American with 14 pass deflections. After the season was over, Witherspoon would go in the top 5, Chase Brown would go to the Bengals, and a couple of other guys would hear their name called from the Illini. Bielema was winning games and sending players off to the NFL, and this was a pretty big deal. In 2023, this time Illinois was picked to finish 4th in the Big Ten West, but sadly the season would be a little bit of fall off. After surviving a scare with Toledo, who actually was pretty good in week 1, they then blow it. They lost on the road to Kansas 34-23, and then in their return game against Penn State, the Lions got their revenge, winning 30-13. Illinois was already behind the 8 ball, and besides they went over FAU, it was kind of rough. They got killed 44-19 on the road against Purdue, lost 20-7 against Nebraska, and now the team was all of a sudden 2-4. They'd need somewhat of a miracle to make a bowl game, and they almost pulled it off. They went on the road and beat Maryland 27-24 in a thriller, and then lost a tough one to Wisconsin 25-21. Alright, now they just need 3 wins. Now they just have to win 3 of 4, and they would make a bowl game. On the road against Minnesota, we saw Tommy DeVito get hurt. From there, we saw the emergence of one of my favorite players of all time, John Paddock. John Paddock was at Ball State for a couple of seasons before becoming a walk-on at Illinois in his 6th and final year of eligibility. His name got called, he led the team down the field and scored a touchdown. The team won 27-26, and then the legend of John Paddock grew even more. In a game against Indiana, John Paddock threw for nearly 500 yards, put up an insane amount of touchdowns, and ultimately led them to a 48-45 win in overtime. He found Isaiah Williams for a game-winning score, and John Paddock had one of the most memorable 5-quarter runs I've ever seen. They're now within 1 game of making a bowl game, and they just have to beat either Iowa or Northwestern. While the Hawkeyes had a terrible offense, they ended up getting off to a good season, and ultimately Illinois would lose by 2 in this one. Okay, yeah, that was tough, but you just needed 1 more win against Northwestern, who you had beaten a ton the last 2 years. But, in a crazy way, they lost this game by 2 points as well. Northwestern won 45-43, went 5-7, and missed a bowl game. Honestly, it's crazy how those last 6 games went for Illinois. No margin was by 4 or more, and there was 1 game that was 1 point, 2 games that were 2 points, and 2 games that were 3 points. Illinois was really playing with fire, and ultimately they got burned. Still though, some players did solid, as Luke Altmyer from Ole Miss ended up throwing for 1,800 yards and 13 touchdowns. Reggie Love and Caden Fegan led the way at the running back position, and then Isaiah Williams became an all-conference receiver. After the season was over, a couple guys would end up getting drafted, like Tip Raymond, their tight end, and Jerzon Newton, their star defensive lineman. That's where we now get into 2024. Luke Altmyer returned at the quarterback spot, Caden Fegan was back at running back, and Pat Bryant has slowly started to emerge at wide receiver. They also grabbed former UTSA and Ole Miss receiver Zachary Franklin, and Illinois was a little bit under the radar. They ended up beating Eastern Illinois 45-0 in Week 1, and then in Week 2 they had a thriller. In a game that honestly should have gone Kansas's way, Illinois made the most of Kansas's turnovers and ended up beating the Jayhawks 23-17. The upset over the number 19 Jayhawks led to them storming the field, which they should not have done, but still it was a big win and a lot of momentum for Illinois. In Week 3, they'd end up beating Central Michigan 30-9 before they would enter the AP poll at number 24. Some think they're inflated because of that win over Kansas, who now looks terrible, but they'd be put to the test against Dylan Raiola in Nebraska. The Huskers were ranked number 22 in the country, and just a couple of days ago, this game was wild. Ended up going to overtime, and Illinois would ultimately win 31-24. Bret Bielema got another signature win, and Illinois is now 4-0. They play number 9 Penn State this upcoming Saturday, and Bret Bielema and the Fighting Illini have come a long way. They're no longer just a Big Ten doormat and are very tough to play each and every week. If you haven't noticed, they've either won games or lost by few points, and it's showing that Bret Bielema has a system, and he's ultimately figured out a secret success for winning in Champaign. Not many coaches have been able to do that, so honestly, I have to give a toast to Bret Bielema and what he has done there. For the rest of the season, Illinois actually has a decent chance at having a good year. After the Penn State game, they play a Purdue team that looks absolutely terrible, Michigan has looked beatable, and then they go on the road and play Oregon. While I doubt they win that game, they'll probably at least make it competitive. After that, they have Minnesota and Michigan State, who both don't really look that great, and then they go on the road to play Rutgers and Northwestern. Rutgers looks solid this year, but at the same time, I don't really trust them, and then Northwestern will be a tough game just because of how they play. I really think there is a path for Illinois to win 10 games, and if somehow, some way, they can pull off that upset against number 9 Penn State, or somehow beat Oregon and end up with one loss, they may find themselves in the Big Ten Championship, and maybe make their way into the back end of the 2024 college football playoff. I know that's a little bit far-fetched to think, but the schedule does give them an opportunity for that. Ultimately, I think they're going to end up going probably 9-3 or 10-2, as those road games are difficult, and it's hard to win each and every week. College football has been very unpredictable so far, but Bielema has been pretty predictable. The games will be close, they'll run the ball down your throat, and they have a couple of really good star players on each side of the ball. I have to give a testament to what Bielema has done in Illinois, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you're an Illinois fan though, what do you think? How has Bret Bielema done this? What do you think the ceiling is for Illinois' program? And what team, topic, or situation should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.